Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Let's do it.
All right. This time we're going to be exploring something super fascinating, heredity and variation. Like how we get our traits from our parents and what makes each of us so unique.
Yeah, it's amazing how much variation there is.
It really is.
And I think a good starting point is to just acknowledge how long humans have been interacting with genetics, even without realizing it. I mean, those early farmers who were selectively breeding their crops and livestock, they were essentially the first genetic engineers.
Totally. They were picking up the best traits and making sure those got passed down.
Exactly. They understood that certain traits could be inherited even if they didn't have the scientific explanation for it.
Yeah, like they didn't know about DNA or anything like that.
Nope. But they still managed to achieve some pretty incredible results.
Our sources actually mention this breed of cow from Punjab, India, called the Sahiwal cow.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
They were developed over centuries to be able to withstand heat and produce tons of milk.
Impressive.
It really is.
Oh.
And it shows you how long we've been kind of tinkering with genetics, even without fully understanding the science behind it.
Right. But then, boom, in the 19th century, Gregor Mendel enters the scene.
Then everything changes.
Absolutely. This guy was meticulous. He spent years, I think 7 years, meticulously studying pea plants.
7 years.
7 years, tracking traits like plant height, seed color, all kinds of things. And what made his work truly groundbreaking was his use of math and statistics to analyze his results.
That was a pretty big deal back then, applying that kind of rigorous analysis to biology.
Game changer. And it led him to discover the fundamental principles of inheritance, those laws that govern how traits get passed down from parents to offspring.
His work is the basis for everything we know about genetics today.
Absolutely. Like the law of dominance, for example.
Yeah, that explains why some traits just seem to mask others.
Right. Like if you have one gene for brown eyes and one gene for blue eyes,
you're probably going to end up with brown eyes.
because brown is dominant. It's like it overpowers the blue-eyed gene.
Exactly. And then there's the law of segregation, which explains how those different versions of a gene, the alleles, separate during the formation of sperm and egg cells.
So each parent contributes one allele.
And those alleles combine in the offspring to determine the trait. So, our traits are a mix and match of our parents' genes.
Pretty much. It's like a genetic lottery.
You got it.
But hold on, because it's not always a simple win or lose situation.
Oh. So it's not always just dominant and recessive.
Right. Sometimes you get blending. Like, imagine crossing a red snapdragon flower with a white one.
Okay, I'm imagining it. What happens?
You might get pink offspring.
Really?
It's called incomplete dominance.
Really? Huh, so it's like the traits meet somewhere in the middle.
Exactly. And then there's codominance.
Codominance, okay.
Where both alleles express themselves fully, like in the human ABO blood group system.
Okay, so you can have both the A and B antigens present at the same time.
That's right. See, it's not always as straightforward as we might think. And Mendel, he didn't stop at just one trait. He was curious about what happens when you look at two traits simultaneously.
So he was upping the complexity.
He was. And this led to his discovery of the law of independent assortment, which states that different genes are often inherited independently of each other. It's like flipping two coins. The outcome of one doesn't affect the other.
So, inheriting a gene for brown eyes doesn't influence whether you also inherit a gene for attached earlobes.
Exactly. They're independent of each other. But there's a catch.
Oh, I knew there had to be a catch. What is it?
There are some important exceptions to this law, like genes that are located close together on a chromosome. They tend to be inherited together as a package deal. We call this linkage. But wait, even linked genes can be separated during a process called recombination. Recombination? Is that where things get all mixed up?
Yeah, you could say that. It's like shuffling the genetic deck.
So are we talking about those X-shaped things, the chromosomes?
Yes. Those are key players in all of this.
I vaguely remember those from high school biology.
Oh, yeah. You can't forget about chromosomes. They're basically the structures that carry the genetic information Mendel was describing.
So his laws were actually describing the behavior of these chromosomes during reproduction.
Bingo. That's exactly what was happening. The discovery of chromosomes and how they move during cell division was a major turning point.
It connected those abstract concepts of inheritance to actual physical structures within the cell.
Exactly. And it led to the development of the chromosomal theory of inheritance. And then along comes this guy named Thomas Hunt Morgan, who used fruit flies to further our understanding.
Fruit flies? Those tiny things that are always buzzing around ripe bananas.
The very same. They hold the secrets to genetics.
They were actually perfect for genetic research.
Really?
Yeah, they have short life cycles, produce tons of offspring, and their traits are easy to observe.
So it's like having a fast-forward button for genetic experiments.
Exactly. And through his work with fruit flies, Morgan made a groundbreaking discovery: sex-linked genes.
Sex-linked genes, what are those?
Yeah, they're genes that are located on the sex chromosomes, those X and Y chromosomes that determine whether we're male or female.
Oh, right, those. So what's so special about genes on those chromosomes?
Well, Morgan found that certain traits, like colorblindness, are more common in males than females.
Interesting. Why is that?
It all comes down to the fact that males only have one X chromosome. So if they inherit a gene for colorblindness on that X, they'll express the trait.
Ah, because they don't have another X chromosome to potentially counteract it?
Precisely. Females, on the other hand, have two X chromosomes, so they're less likely to express a recessive trait like colorblindness.
That makes sense. So it's more than just dominant and recessive genes. It's about which chromosomes those genes are located on.
You got it. It's a complex dance of chromosomes, genes, and alleles.
And we're only just scratching the surface.
We are. Because remember how we were talking about multiple genes contributing to a single trait?
Yeah, like with height.
Right. Well, some traits are influenced by many genes, each with a small effect. We call this polygenic inheritance.
Polygenic, okay. So it's like a team effort with multiple genes working together to shape a single trait.
Exactly. And this often results in a spectrum of variation rather than clear-cut categories.
Like instead of just being tall or short, there's a whole range of heights in between.
Exactly. It's not just black and white. It's all the shades of gray in between.
So our genetic inheritance is determined by a super complex interplay of chromosomes, genes, alleles, dominance, linkage, recombination.
You've got it. It's incredible, isn't it?
My mind is already blown. And we haven't even talked about mutations and genetic disorders yet.
Oh, we've got lots more to explore.
Well, I'm ready for part 2. We've covered so much ground already, and it's clear that the world of inheritance is full of surprises. So we've talked about how multiple genes can team up to influence a single trait, but what about the flip side? Can one gene have multiple effects?
You're thinking about pleiotropy. It does sound a little counterintuitive, doesn't it? One gene influencing multiple seemingly unrelated traits.
Yep, exactly.
But it happens. A really good example of this, phenylketonuria, or PKU for short.
Okay, PKU.
It's a genetic disorder where a mutation in a single gene ends up affecting mental development, hair color, even skin pigmentation.
Wow, one gene impacting so many different things. It really shows you how interconnected everything is.
It really does. Genes are not isolated. They're all part of this intricate network.
Which brings us to something else that's pretty fundamental, how our biological sex is determined.
Right. It all comes down to those special pairs of chromosomes, the sex chromosomes. We have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and one of those pairs determines our sex.
Right, XX for females and XY for males. And it's really amazing how such a fundamental aspect of who we are boils down to those chromosomes.
Absolutely. Usually it's the presence or absence of the Y chromosome that determines biological sex. During sperm production, half of the sperm receive an X chromosome and half receive a Y. But egg cells, they always carry an X chromosome.
So it's the sperm that determines the sex of the offspring.
Exactly. A 50-50 coin toss at the moment of conception.
Fascinating. But I think the textbook also mentioned some unusual sex determination systems in other parts of the animal kingdom.
Oh, yeah. Nature loves to mix things up. Like some insects use what we call the exo system. Females have 2 X chromosomes, and males only have 1.
Wow, so different.
And in birds, it's actually the females who have 2 different sex chromosomes, ZW.
Yeah.
And males have ZZ.
It's incredible how different species have developed these different mechanisms for determining sex. Speaking of variations, what about mutations? I always think of like those sci-fi movies where mutations are always a bad thing, but they're actually a natural part of genetics, right?
Absolutely. Mutations are essentially changes in the DNA sequence, and they're the ultimate source of all this genetic variation we see.
So without mutations, we wouldn't have this incredible diversity of life on Earth.
Exactly. They're like the spice of life, adding variety to the genetic mix. And they can be small changes like single base pair or larger deletions or insertions of genetic material.
And sometimes these mutations can lead to genetic disorders.
Sometimes, yeah. They can disrupt the normal function of a gene, and that can lead to a wide range of disorders, such as sickle cell anemia.
Okay.
A single base substitution in the hemoglobin gene causes red blood cells to become distorted.
It's amazing to think that such a small change in the DNA code can have such a significant impact on someone's health.
Right. And then we have those chromosomal disorders, which involve abnormalities in the number or structure of chromosomes. Like Down syndrome, for example, is caused by an extra copy of chromosome 21.
And there are also sex chromosome disorders, right? Like Klinefelter syndrome.
Yes, with an extra X chromosome in males, and Turner syndrome, where females are missing an X chromosome. And these chromosomal abnormalities often have significant developmental and health consequences.
Studying these disorders and family histories, it's like piecing together a giant puzzle, right? To understand how traits are passed down through generations.
It is. It's called pedigree analysis, where we create these family tree diagrams to track traits and see patterns of inheritance and figure out the probability of certain traits being passed on, even identify carriers of genetic disorders.
It's pretty humbling to realize how much our lives are shaped by this genetic legacy that we inherit from our ancestors.
We really are a part of this continuous chain of life, all connected by our genes. And the more we understand genetics, the more we realize its implications, both for individuals and for society as a whole.
Right. We've come a long way from those early farmers selectively breeding their crops. Today, we're talking about gene editing and genetic testing and personalized medicine. It's a whole new frontier, and it brings up a lot of ethical questions.
It does. With the ability to manipulate genes comes a huge responsibility. We need to think carefully about the potential consequences of altering the very fabric of life.
Yeah, it's kind of like we've been handed this incredibly powerful toolbox, and now we have to figure out how to use all these tools responsibly.
That's a really good way to put it. I think it's why it's so important to have these open discussions.
Yeah.
These thoughtful debates about the ethics of it all. We need to be exploring these different perspectives and considering the long-term impacts of these choices that we're making. It's a discussion that needs to involve everyone, not just scientists.
That's a really important point. So what does all this mean for us, the non-scientists, the everyday people just trying to make sense of this complex world of genetics?
Well, I think it means we have a responsibility to educate ourselves about genetics and all this new technology. The more we understand, the better equipped we'll be to participate in these really important conversations.
Yeah.
And to advocate for responsible use of these technologies.
It's empowering to realize that we don't need a PhD to have a voice in all this.
Right. It's not just for the experts.
Exactly.
And I think on a more personal level, understanding inheritance can help us to really appreciate just the incredible tapestry of life. This intricate dance of genes that makes each individual unique.
It connects us to our ancestors, to our families, to the entire web of life on Earth.
It's a story that's still being written with each new generation,
Exactly. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of inheritance. We've come a long way from Mendel's pea plants to gene editing. It's been quite the journey.
It has.
I think I'd like to leave our listeners with one final thought. Now that you have a deeper understanding of inheritance, think about this. How might this knowledge shape the future of human health? How will it impact the way we approach disease prevention and treatment? Those are some big questions.
They are?
That I think will continue to challenge and inspire us for many years to come. And that's the beauty of a deep dive, It's not just about absorbing information. It's about sparking that curiosity and igniting new questions and just empowering you to keep exploring.
Keep learning.
So stay curious, keep asking those questions, and until next time, happy learning.